Bobby Fischer never played a lot of gambits. He preferred to capture pieces in the early part of the game and then start sacrificing them later. Still, every once in a while, he trotted out a fine old gambit in great classical or romantic style. For example, this 1963 game against the famous Reuben Fine, known for the definitive endgame manual basic chess endings. Now, Fischer may have been thinking, I don't want to go up against this guy in an endgame, so after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, instead of the Ruy Lopez or Spanish game, bringing the bishop to b5, Bobby once again saw the bishop come to c4. The idea, just attack f7. Let's see if we can take this guy out early. Well, Fine responded bishop c5, preferring the standard Italian game to the two knights defense, which would have had the knight jump to f6 instead. Here, Bobby played a surprising gambit. Not a new idea, certainly. Captain Evans Gambit is enjoying a new round of popularity and is anything but washed up, but it was a very, very rare thing in top-level chess back in the 60s. White invests a pawn to gain complete control of the center, and whether black accepts or declines, White's going to have really good attacking chances. In recent years, some top grandmasters have taken up the line, which had been relegated to the amateur ranks for many decades. And there are several new books on the subject, debating much of the extensive old analysis. Today, with the help of computers, you can often find new twists and improvements over the old lines. However, back in Bobby Fischer's day, they weren't using computers. He had to work out the details himself at home. Naturally, Fine took up the challenge. Why not grab the pawn? And now the bishop is chased back. It goes to a5 in this game. There are several different strategies for black. The bishop can go to e7, that's quite popular. But this keeps some pressure because the bishop is lined up against White's king. And even though there are pieces in the way, they can get out of the way. Or, in this case, they won't be able to get out of the way because then White's king would be in check. So you might expect Fischer to castle and free up the center, but instead he boldly offers the pawn at d4. Fine continues to accept the challenge. After all, White's pawn at c3 is pinned, so there's no chance of getting the ideal pawn center. Now, after castling, White is threatening to capture, but black gets in first. That's a third pawn. It's often said that the only way to refute a gambit is to accept it, but really, this is too much. And black really needs to develop. And even just retreating the bishop to b6 would have been a logical move, because that would have kept pressure at d4, even if White could station the pawn there. Now, the target at f7 is exposed because black hasn't yet castled. After queen b3, the f-pawn needs defense, so the queen comes to e7, and now White recaptured at c3. So Bobby's just 2 pawns down, and in the opening, considering his huge lead in development, it's quite worth it. After all, White just has to move the bishop from c1 and then move one of the rooks to the center, and development will be complete. Black will have to move the knight out, get castled, then move a pawn out, get the bishop from c8 out of the way, and then move a rook to the center. This is a huge lead. Now, black's already in some trouble, but now the knight at f6 is going to turn out to be a target. Fischer grabs the initiative and never lets go. He's forcing the game. The queen is under attack, so is the knight at f6. After the capture, that valuable defender, the knight at f6, is gone. Now, the bishop and queen are blocked. They no longer directly attack f7, but if white can get a rook to the e-file somehow, black will lose the pinned queen. Meanwhile, the knight at c6 is under attack. Well, where should it go? If it retreats, that loses to bishop a3. d6 takes care of that problem, but now the check at b5 picks off the bishop. And there are big threats still. Pawn at c7 is under attack, and a rook can come to e1. Position is hopeless. So, Fine moved the knight to e5 in the center of the board. After the exchange, the queen is on the dangerous e-file, stranded in the middle, and the attack on the rook at a1 just doesn't mean anything. In fact, after bishop b2, the queen has to run away. She's certainly going to get off the e-file, but there's no safe haven. True, the queen does defend the pawn at g7 so that the white bishop can't capture it, but after h4, the queen has to move. Might as well take the pawn, but just for completeness, if the queen decide to go to g4, then after the check, the rook is lost, but the open e-file is more important. The king moves to d8, the queen threatens checkmate at e7, the pawn at h4 falls and e7 is covered, but the problem is that there's no place safe for the queen to retreat without allowing the bishop to get her at f6, or the queen to get her at g5, or if she goes to e7, then the queen simply captures with checkmate. So after h4, might as well take it and cover the key square, but now the pawn at g7 falls. After rook g8, the rook now lines up against white's king, but the check on the open file is deadly. The king moved over. The bishop could have captured the rook first. It wouldn't have made any difference, because after the queen moves to g3, black resigned. If black captures white's queen, then the bishop to f6 checkmate move will end the game. There is no safe retreat for the queen that doesn't allow the bishop to come to f6. So, this was an example of a classical gambit, the Evans Gambit, being used by superstar Bobby Fischer, and I think he displayed all of the great spirit of the opening, as well as some very instructive attacking strategies and tactics.